Existential courage is not the same as courage in action. In fact, the two forms are often at variance, in a kind of adversarial relationship. We may be brave enough to stare down infinity and accept that nothing has value in itself, yet this knowledge makes us shrink away from existence, as if to say, I am no threat. Thus, the instincts are eroded, and what was once a psyche struggling against death shuffles nervously towards it. The other common response is to shield ourselves from existential dread by means of pleasant or motivating fictions. With this, our movements are quicker, more spontaneous. Recall Goethe's proclamation, I hate everything that merely instructs me without augmenting or directly invigorating my activity. The person of action often trusts in fate, seeing everything from the worst to the best as a piece of the master plan. What a logic and genealogy when confronted with the divine sanction of intuition and personal experience. What is chaos when the mind is able to organize it within transcendental systems? It is a rare type indeed, who leaps into the abyss and is not torn asunder by its violent interplay of forces. Perhaps this is not even surprising. Life, unadulterated and unfiltered, is a brutal, tyrannical thing. Words are scarcely enough to describe it, and even the darkest imaginations can only conjure up a faint sketch of the most horrifying aspects of reality. The sheer scale, the destructive kernel at the heart of all creation, the consciousness wrestling against dissolution. Lovecraftian themes resonate through culture because they explore the threat of unbounded knowledge, of seeing too clearly without the veneer of ignorance, and the plunge into insanity which ensues. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance, in the midst of black seas and infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality, and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation, or flee from the light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. H.P. Lovecraft, The Call of Cthulhu. Most cower from such a possibility. However, there is an antipode to this assessment, a romantic and encouraging idea that one might be strong enough to look upon the cold indifference of the universe and stand firm. Many pessimists believe that they have done so, but then retreat into the comfort of words and social isolation, disguising it as the courage to reject vanity or some other vice. In a not so dissimilar phenomenon, countless realists secretly harbour the naive optimism that progress is inevitable, so long as we constantly guard against meddlers and parasites. This is simply the old faith in different garb. What many fail to recognise is that the philosophy underpinning much of our thought makes the rejection of life inevitable, specifically because it places the horror of reality before our eyes. Utilitarianism casts images of suffering on every street corner, so that all are forced to feel its visceral and unrelenting presence. Even those who might otherwise have had vital energies are hastily ushered into the utilitarian understanding of pleasure as value and suffering as expenditure. A motley of joys and concerns and sorrows and excitations are all compressed down into exchangeable units. From birth, we feel the anxiety radiating out of those who cannot bear the idea of a thoughtless life, corrupting us. Those who either implicitly or explicitly agree with Socrates when he said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." This economic, intellectualized view on reality, which is always weighing costs against a universal equivalent, ironically produces its own hell. Even when life appears good, when pleasure is achieved, morality demands that we ask, how much did this cost? Such thinking was not common historically. Earlier times saw legacy as an inexorable part of the continuity of the self, and so the person lived on in their monuments and stories. This was especially evident in the early Greco-Roman civilizations, where a person was thought to go on living in a sense, beneath the ground, even requiring nourishment from time to time. Numer Denis Fustel de Coulanges described how the being who lived under the ground was not sufficiently free from human frailties to have no need of food, and therefore, on certain days of the year, a meal was carried to every tomb. It would be extremely difficult to make a utilitarian calculation with this belief, let alone with the ascendancy of the more otherworldly afterlives. However, the modern human has finally been converted by rational dogmas and science into an object detached from its effect, a psychology without a telos. Only genetic lineage is considered to preserve a person through time, and even this has been made insignificant, arbitrary, a mere accident of nature. Aristotle seems to take for granted the idea that each child owes a debt to their parents on account of receiving the gift of life. Fathers, after all, are the cause of our existence, which we think of as the greatest good of all. Such a notion becomes meaningless when life no longer has intrinsic value, when pleasure and pain are the only valid metrics. The utilitarian framework no doubt helps to make people more conscientious, but it at the same time stifles action. Alongside the Socratic faith in rationality and his rather optimistic equation, virtue equals knowledge equals happiness, the result is devastating. It brings the whole of the world's most challenging aspects into stark relief, while diminishing all joys, all aesthetic affirmations, transmuting them into mere pleasures unbound from context. A preferable framework would permit ignorance and a lack of introspection in certain ways of life, perhaps not the most destructive and nefarious ones, but certainly those which dance on the edge and can still topple either way. For among a people overflowing with vitality, magnanimity is not uncommon. By draining the energies of humanity, by forcing us to stare down the abyss, not only are the moral the most affected, but they turn bitter and resentful. Those who might have been the best disciples of utilitarianism are thereby squandered. He who fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster, and if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you.